Welcome to our online training videos for Refuge Student Ministries. This is video number 1. We're going to talk about just the philosophy of Refuge, what we do with Rite of Passage, and just it's going to be the jumping off point. So there's going to be a lot of philosophy of ministry in this video, and the subsequent videos are going to be about procedures and when are we doing stuff, how are we doing stuff, but this really needs to be the jumping off point. So we're going to dive right into it. So what is Rite of Passage Ministries? It was based on a book. I actually have it right over here. Based on a book called Rite of Passage Parenting by Walker Moore. And I can get through that book if you're really interested in it. But what happened was Walker Moore was a youth pastor, and he was struggling in his youth minister role, so he decided to take some time off to seek the Lord, opened up his Bible, tried to find stuff about youth ministry, and at the end of his time, he realized there was nothing in the Bible about youth ministry. There was, here he was, a youth minister, and there's nothing in the Bible about youth ministry. What he saw was that in the Bible there's only children and adults. There was no such thing as a youth. There was no such thing as a teenager. And he began to do some research and realized that the word teenager didn't come around until the 1920s. And so throughout most of human history, there has been children, and then something happens and they cross over into adulthood. And in all of cultures around the earth, throughout ancient times, there's been what's called a rite of passage. It's been called different things in different cultures, but there's always been a rite of passage from a child to an adult. And so the problem is that in the Western culture, we don't have a defining line of when children become adults. And so, if I were to ask you all, when does a kid become an adult, I would get a ton of answers. 16 is a popular one, when you get to drive, you get freedom. But then you can't vote and you can't smoke cigarettes until you're 18. There's a lot of other things that comes along with being 18. So a lot of people say 18, but you can't drink, you can't do a lot of things until you're 21. And so then you become 21 and you're like, okay, now I'm an adult, but you go to try to rent a car and you realize you have to be 26 to rent a car. And so that's the problem, is that we don't know when a student becomes an adult, we don't know when a child becomes an adult, and they don't know. So parents don't know, and the children don't know, and so there becomes this just ambiguity, this confusion that happens, and there's a lot of tension and struggle that causes. So Rite of Passage talks about this. He draws it out this way, that there's, like a Venn diagram. You've got, let's do it over here. Being a child, and then you have adulthood, right? And then in here is this teenager or youth. And that is where the struggle happens. If you're a parent and you're watching this, and you've had a teenager, or you've been a teenager, that this is a hard place to be. Because in many ways you're still a child, you don't know you're not given responsibility, you're not given freedom, and you want that stuff, but you're not allowed to have it. And you don't feel like an adult though, you don't feel like a child, you don't feel like an adult, and so there's this huge confusion and identity problem. And so what happens is, because a child doesn't know when he becomes an adult, a lot of times a child will, or a youth, a teenager, will act out in whatever way they can to assert their adulthood. This can be through smoking cigarettes. This can be sleeping with your boyfriend or girlfriend. This can be drinking. Maybe the better one, but in the long run, maybe not so good, is they go out and get a job at a young age and they live for money. They live for the job rather than living for the Lord. Nothing wrong with hard work and getting a job at a young age. I actually encourage that. But when you start to worship that as a god instead of worshiping the God, there's a lot of problems that happen. And so we see ever since you're a kid, you want to be an adult. You want responsibility. You want, like my daughter is 2 years old, and she is already watching my wife, her mother, how to care for my 3-month-old. And so she has dolls, and she swaddles her baby dolls. She's wanting to learn how to cook. She pretends to cook. She pretends to use toy hammers and stuff because she sees me working in the garage. I love woodworking. And so she's trying to be an adult. And so when we're kids, we want to grow up. The problem comes when a child wants to step into adulthood, but the culture and the parents don't let them and don't disciple them into that. So this is one of the reasons that I try not to call it youth ministry, because instead call it student ministry, because a student can be at any age. We as adults are still students in many ways. So what's the alternative to this? This is the biblical kind of way, and the way it's been done for thousands of years. You've got a child, then you have what's called a rite of passage, a defining line where they step out of childhood and they step into adulthood. And this is the rite of passage. And I know you probably can't read all this, but trust me, that's what it says. Child, rite of passage, adult. There's a defining line, and a lot of cultures have this. Tribal cultures out in Africa, they will give a kid a weapon, send them out and say, go kill a lion or a bear or whatever it is. When you bring the head of the lion back to the tribe, you will be considered a man. And there's various forms of this. The Jewish faith has the bar mitzvah. When the son turns 13, he becomes a man, and he steps into the role of being an adult in the family. He starts helping out with the family business at a very young age, and so he starts being discipled in what it looks like to be a man, and a godly man. The Mexicans have the quinceañera. When a young lady turns 15, after that, they're a woman. And we in the Western culture don't have that a lot of times. So, rite of passage. And so we try to take students on trips. There's a Guatemala trip coming up in 2020 that we try to take students on that trip, and that's a good rite of passage. We also do training with our student leaders, and we have an event that we actually call our rite of passage night, and we kind of bestow upon them in that night with their parents adulthood. And so that's all part of the philosophy of this. So what makes an adult? All right, an adult has what we call a significant task in the culture. And a significant task is, bing! All right, a significant task is a job or responsibility that, if not done, people suffer. Okay, so when you're a child, you do simulator tasks. You do what your parents do in a simulation kind of way. But when you step into adulthood, you are given a significant task. And every adult in a culture has one of these. If they don't, a lot of times they struggle with identity. They struggle with depression, trying to find their way. What's my meaning in life? A job or responsibility that, if not done, people suffer. Okay, so a lot of you have teenagers in your home, and you make them a list of chores, which is good. Everybody has chores. I have chores. But they don't have a significant task. And you think that giving them a job of taking out the trash is a significant task. Well, what happens if, Billy doesn't do that? It starts to stink. The trash piles up. You start to argue with one another. You yell at him. And because he's a teenager, he's, oh my gosh. It's like a 2-day journey to take the trash out. We've all been there. that's not a significant task. And so a significant task is a job or responsibility. If not done, people suffer. Now, we used to have these built into the American way of life when we were much more of a farming nation. Little Billy had to wake up and milk the cow, and if he didn't milk the cow dried up, and we had no more milk, right? And you couldn't sell the milk, you couldn't drink the milk. People suffered. There was a financial problem that came if Billy didn't get up and milk the cow. So that's a significant task. And we used to have these built in kind of to our culture, but anymore we don't have that because we are blessed with the prosperity of America. We don't have to rely on our kids to bring in an income, to help on the farm. And so a lot of times they just don't have significant tasks. And so they try to act out, like I said earlier, they try to assert their adulthood in other ways. So that's a significant task. This is kind of the basis of it. If you want to see this in the Bible, you need to look no further than the story of Jesus getting lost at the temple. I used to wonder, why would you put that story in the Bible? It's just a random story, just like to show that Joseph and Mary weren't good parents. No, that's not why it's in the Bible. It's in the Bible because it's a coming of age story, right? Because Mary and Joseph leave Jesus, and Jesus is old enough to kind of be doing things on his own. So they leave, and they're in this huge family group, and they leave, and they go 3 days journey, and they didn't notice Jesus was gone, and that, to me, that's like, you're just bad parents. But no, they weren't. They trusted Jesus as an adult, right? And they looked around, realized he wasn't with them, so they had to go back. Okay, so this is like 3 days journey, or maybe it was a day's journey back, I can't remember. But Jesus is there for at least like 3 days, and they're looking for him. And so he has had to find a place to sleep. He's had to secure some food. And he has had to take care of himself, all by himself, And they find him, and it's really cool. They find him in the temple talking with the priests and the teachers of the law, and they're all marveling at it, And I used to think that was the main point of it, that was Jesus was really smart at a young age. But what comes next is that they ask him, where have you been? We've been looking for you everywhere. And he replies with something really amazing. He says, "Didn't you know I must be about my Father's business?" What happens when a young Jewish boy becomes a man? He starts to help out with the family business. And so what he's saying, I want to be like my dad in heaven, and I want to take on his business. And I must be about my Father's business because I'm a man now. And so it's a really cool passage. And I could go on and on and on about all this. And if you have any questions, you can obviously email me. But this is just kind of the basis, the philosophy. We want to take students from child to adult. We don't want to babysit teenagers and keep them from acting out. We want to grow them up in the Lord. So this is our main goal, is to have rite of passage moments so that they are transferred from childhood to adulthood, and it's bestowed upon them, and they don't have to feel the need to assert their adulthood. It is bestowed upon them, and they live it out. It's a very different thing. Just to end it real shortly, Walker Moore, when he does trainings, he often talks about this banking system. If I put money in my bank, I put money in there, and then I go to an ATM and I make a withdrawal, right? I have money, and it works. The whole system works. But if I withdraw and withdraw and withdraw, and I don't make any deposits, and I keep withdrawing, what happens? I run out of money, I get turned down, it goes into the negative, bad things happen. And with our students, we don't try to make too many withdrawals. We try to deposit. And when we need to, we can make a withdrawal. And it goes way smoother, right? And so part of that is bestowing upon them adulthood, even before they're like a full-grown adult. And all of life is rite of passage, is what Walker Moore says. And so even before they're a full-grown adult, we are calling them an adult, we're calling them to a higher standard, and we're pouring into them. And so when they need a little nudging, we can pretty much just ask them and say, hey, what would an adult do right now? Oh, an adult would do this. Okay, do that, you know? And it just seems to work way better. And so as you are a helper for Refuge Student Ministries, this is a huge thing. Make deposits in our students. Call them to somewhere higher. And when you need to make withdrawal, do it in a way that you're not telling them what to do like a child. You're asking them, hey, what would an adult do? And so this is all kind of the jumping off point for everything else that we're going to do. So thanks for watching. I know it was a little long, but yeah, hope you found it informational. See you in the next video.